Hello and welcome to Footnotes, the Cicerone podcast, a podcast to inspire you about outdoor travel and activities in the UK and across the world. I'm Hannah and I hope you enjoy this episode. You can always email me with your thoughts or questions on live@cicerone.co.uk and I'd love to hear from you. So in this episode, I'm here talking to Carroll Dorgan, who, among other things, is the author of our new guidebook to the Brittany Coast Path. So hi, Carroll.
Hi, Hannah. Pleasure to be here.
It is an absolute pleasure to be talking about this book. I mean, Cicerone only make guidebooks to good places. That's kind of the point, is that we make walking and trekking and cycling books to places that we believe are nice to go and do these activities. But having said that, every now and then a book comes along that just speaks to my soul. And this book, this route, just looks like it's just a route for me, I think. It looks perfectly doable for someone who's not mega experienced. There's some amazing places that you stop along the way. It just looks fantastic. So first of all, can you tell us where is the, well, it's obviously Brittany, but where is the Brittany Coast Path?
Well, this section of the Brittany Coast Path that we're talking about begins at, it's along the north coast of Brittany. Start there. And it begins at Mont-Saint-Michel, which is on the border between Normandy and Brittany. And in fact, Britons and Normans dispute over which department or the region it should be in. It starts in Mont-Saint-Michel, carries on west, following the coast as far as Roscoff. And so it goes through 3 French departments. As the seagull flies, the distance from Mont-Saint-Michel to Roscoff is about 170 kilometers. And if you walk along the GR34, it's more like 625 kilometers. And so that tells you something about the route and the coast and the nature of it all. The coast is highly indented, and this follows the coast all the way. The trail is called the Sentier des Douaniers, which is the customs officers' path. And there are customs paths in many places, but this is one where, they had to follow every little cove and inlet and estuary and out around every headland to make sure that the smugglers were caught, basically. And since there are so many places where a smuggler could load or land contraband, the trail follows all these places. And so it's quite a great way of exploring the coast to follow the route that was taken by those customs officers all those years ago. It's no longer, used for that kind of purpose, but the trail has been maintained and has been restored in recent years. And you do walk past some old buildings, some small stone buildings that are called corps de garde, where the customs officers were based or sheltered while they were on duty. So the past of the customs officers' path is still there.
It makes me wonder how many smugglers they actually caught. Because you can imagine they had these 2 poor customs officers or something patrolling 600 kilometres.
Yeah.
I can imagine it was quite easy to get contraband into France.
Well, I'm afraid I have no data on that subject, but I think you're probably right. The smugglers are very, resourceful, and it's a lot of territory to cover. And of course, they were also crossing the land border, and the incentives for smuggling were enormous. Back in the old regime of France before the revolution, one of the key elements here was the fact that the salt tax, which was called la gabelle, did not apply in Brittany. This dates back to privileges that were granted or maintained when France annexed Brittany in 1532. And so the price of salt was very, very low in Brittany compared to elsewhere in France, where the gabelle was very high. It was a factor of about 25 to 1. And I've read somewhere in a report by Louis XVI's finance minister, Jacques Necker, who reported to the king in 1784 that there were 23,000 men deployed to stop smuggling all around France, not just Brittany. So a lot of them were walking along that Sentier, later called the Sentier des Douaniers, and also patrolling the land border between say, Brittany, where you could buy salt for 2 or 3 livres per quintal, which is 100 kilos. And over in Anjou next door, it would cost 56 or 57 livres. So that created those incentives, gave people a reason to smuggle and to find ways to avoid those customs officers.
Fantastic. I'm surprised it's called gabelle, la gabelle.
La gabelle. That's I don't know the etymology of that word, but that's the famous salt tax, which had a lot of influence on the causes of the French Revolution. It was so unequal. In Brittany, no gabelle. In Lorraine, which I wrote about once in a previous book, it was relatively low because salt was produced there. Whereas in the area around Paris, it was very high. And not only was it high, but you were required to buy a minimum amount of salt per year for all adults. And so the injustice of the gabelle was one of the grievances that people had that helped to spark the French Revolution.
Every day is an opportunity to learn something when I'm talking to you, Carroll. Who knew that we'd be talking about salt tax and the French Revolution in our episode about the Brittany Coast Path? That's wonderful.
I was hoping that we would.
Yeah, it was your plan all along.
That's right.
So it starts at Mont-Saint-Michel, which is
Yes.
is a fantastic tourist attraction in its own right, isn't it? People come from thousands of miles to it. Used to be a pilgrimage destination.
Yeah, it still is, really. Mixed in there somewhere, there are pilgrims, but most of them are tourists buying postcards and special omelets at a particular restaurant. But it's quite a sight. And you appreciate this when you're walking on the GR34 as well, because Mont-Saint-Michel is this great mound, natural stone mound, but then, of course, built up with fortifications and then abbey church upon it. And so from a great distance, the land around there is all flat. So you just see it in the distance for many kilometers before you get there. And so when you have a good view of Mont-Saint-Michel, you can sort of sense what a thrill it would have been and still would be for pilgrims to see this on the horizon and as their destination. And the way, I've written this book, you basically leave Mont-Saint-Michel, but of course somebody could walk the other way. But anyway, you have a several kilometer walk at the beginning where the Mont-Saint-Michel right in front of you with its tall spire and so forth. And then you turn west. So it's a pretty spectacular place, so spectacular that it has, gets really crowded with tourists. But the French have recently, I mean in the last 10 years or so, done a big project to return Mont-Saint-Michel to its natural state as an island, at least an island at high tide. And previously there was a causeway that was built in the 19th century and other works. And so the water didn't flow around it. So silt accumulated and it became a kind of a peninsula. But that was all changed. Now there's a bridge which allows water to flow around it. The dam has been built that is designed in a way to increase the flow of water with the ebbing tide and then carrying sediment out and so forth. So it's really quite nice. And you no longer can park a car right beside Mont-Saint-Michel. You have to park in special enormous parking lots about 2.5 kilometers away. And then there are shuttle buses that take visitors to the island or you can walk. So it's quite a place. It's worth a visit, even if it's kind of crowded. But in a way, I feel when I go there that it's a little bit like the pilgrims of the Middle Ages. I mean, there were crowds of people then too, and there were people trying to sell them, little knickknacks and souvenirs and memorial things, the way they're trying to sell you postcards now. So, what's wrong with that? Yeah. But then it's very nice to turn west and you're more or less on your own walking away on the GR34.
I was talking to Timmy Mallet for one of our earlier episodes, and he cycled to Mont-Saint-Michel as part of his Camino cycle ride.
Right.
And he said he had a room booked, and it was at the very, very, very top of the hill. So he had to carry his e-bike up the entire thing, and he got to the top and sort of gasped out, where can I put my bike? And they told him that he had to take it right back down to the bottom for storage.
Oh my! And e-bikes are not light either.
They're not light at all. So yeah, that always makes me chuckle now when I think of that. But apart from Mont-Saint-Michel, you go past somewhere that sounds amazing, the Emerald Coast.
Yes, the stretch of coast from Mont-Saint-Michel going all the way past Cap Fréhel, I'd say, is called the Emerald Coast, Côte d'Emeraude. And you really appreciate that name. I mean, it sounds a little bit like a tourist office, bit of puffery, but on a sunny day, the water does sparkle with that emerald color. And the great thing is that as you're walking on the GRF 34, you are right above the water, beside it. And so you get a good view of that sparkling emerald water of the Channel coast. And so it's very attractive and very pleasant walking. As you said, it's a pretty accessible trail, but there are places where it goes up and down fairly steeply, not for very long, but for a while. And there's a section, the best part of the Emerald Coast, I would say, would be from Pointe du Grouin to the approach to Saint-Malo. And Pointe du Grouin is around the west of Mont-Saint-Michel. You pass Cancale and you go up to this headland, Pointe du Grouin. And from there towards Saint-Malo is a very, very spectacular trail, traverses across a steep hillside, cliff practically. The trail is a good one, but quite a bit exposed in a few places. So you want to watch your footing. And I would prefer not to do it on a rainy, windy day either, but on a nice sunny day and you have the Emerald Coast there beside you. It's really, really beautiful.
If, like me, you want to immediately go and walk the Brittany Coast Path, then we're offering 25% discount off Carroll's Guidebook if you purchase at the Cicerone website. Just go to cicerone.co.uk and enter the code Brittany25, and I really hope I see you there one day. The GR34 is a much longer route, isn't it?
Yes.
And the part described in your book is the 624 kilometre stretch of this wider route. So where does the GR34 start and finish?
Well, it starts at Mont-Saint-Michel and so goes those 624 kilometers as far as Roscoff, then continues along the northern coast for another 100 kilometers or so to go around what the French call the Pointe de Bretagne, the farthest point west, and then curves inland and follows the coast southeast or so, past a major city like Brest, past the Crozon Peninsula, which is a very special, spectacular place too, and then finally ending after passing along the southern coast of Brittany at Saint-Nazaire, which is at the mouth of the Loire River. So that's what makes up over 2,000 kilometers from Mont-Saint-Michel to Saint-Nazaire. It's all really well worth walking on. I think the northern coast is certainly one of the best parts of it, or the part that we're covering here. There are other good parts, though, too. And certainly around the Pointe de Bretagne, there's some spectacular coastal paths and headlands and so on. And I'm planning to go out there and do some walking and maybe some riding, pretty soon.
There could be a sequel.
Yeah. Well, I feel very lucky that there wasn't already a whole series of Cicerone guidebooks for Brittany, because as you were saying at the beginning, it's a really, clearly a excellent place to walk in and write about.
Yeah, I think we get that quite often. If I can't believe you haven't got a book for here, and you just think we're only a small team and there's only so many we can create. Yeah, sometimes you think, I can't believe we haven't already had this for years. So the other thing about this walk is that the entire route that we cover in the Brittany Coast Path guidebooks would take you about a month. But actually what you've done is you've included suggestions for a couple of 5-day highlights. And I really like that as well, because again, not everybody can take a month off work to go and do a walk or a trek, but taking 5 days off with a weekend to go around some of the sites just sounds perfect to me.
Yes, and that's quite feasible. And you can particularly note that for people who are coming from the United Kingdom or Ireland, so nearby, a week-long outing, a week-long trip could work quite well, because there are good connections by both train and by ferry. There are ferries that connect Britain and Ireland to Saint-Malo and to Roscoff. And it's also, of course, possible to go out to Brittany by train. And there's train service that runs out to Saint-Malo and to several other towns, cities along the route that's covered by this book, including Saint-Brieuc and Paimpol, Lannion, and Morlaix. And then, of course, within Brittany, there are intercity buses that connect many of the towns and cities along this route, as well as some urban bus lines from the cities, such as Saint-Malo and Morlaix and Lannion and so on, that extend out of those cities some distance. And you can also often get, what's a short bus ride can be a one-day stage for a hiker. So those transport options make it quite feasible for somebody to travel, spend one day or so traveling to some point in Brittany where they could then pick up the route for 5 days of walking and then arrive at a place where there is also train or bus service that would enable them to get back home, whether it's in the UK or Ireland or Paris or Frankfurt or whatever, in a day. So that's, there are several recommended places. I'll pick out just one, I guess. Out of those, there are several mentioned, as you say, in the book, but the one I would sort of start with, put at the top of the list, would be the pink Granite Coast.
That was next on my list because
Okay.
I'm such a rock geek that pink granite just sounds, I want to see that.
You will really be amazed when you see these rocks. You have seen, I know, some of the pictures. They're extraordinary. I mean, you look at these boulders of pink granite or other gray granite, whatever. You wonder how in the world were these boulders even formed? What geological forces produce these things? And then, how did they get where they are? And in some cases, you wonder, how do they stay where they are? Because they seem to be teetering on each other and so forth, and stacks of these things, all different shapes. So it is really quite spectacular. There's a section called the Pink Granite Coast, which is roughly from Tréguier to Lannion, I would say. That's certainly one of the 5 day sections that you could walk on. The heart of the Pink Granite Coast, I would say, is between Perros-Guirec and Plumenard, or further on to Trébourdin. And it is just extraordinary. Just every step of the way, you're looking at these rocks and amazed at how they were formed. People have given little whimsical names to some of these boulders, and you can get a map that lists where there's Napoleon's hat, and there's the overturned bottle, and there's the turtle, and the mushroom, and the wave. I think there's one there. And you can give your own names. So it's sort of fun. And sometimes you have to sort of stand in line to take a picture because everybody wants to take a picture of Napoleon's hat or whatever it is. It's worth the walk. I've been up and down that trail several times, and I've enjoyed it, crowds or no crowds. It's really quite spectacular. And I took a stab at explaining how these rocks were formed over the millions of years in the book. And so if you're a rock expert, you can take a look at that and decide whether I got it right.
Oh no, I said I'm a geek. I'm not an expert.
Well, anyway, you'll enjoy looking at those rocks. I mean, they really are beautiful, and it's a nice trail. So the Pink Granite Coast is well named, I would say. There's some really spectacular boulders to look at.
There's just so many things. There's so many things in this book that just look amazing. Another thing that jumped out at me is is it Seven Islands Bird Sanctuary?
Yes, Sept Îles, Seven Islands.
That sounds nice.
It is. A little bit of history there. There used to be thousands and thousands of Atlantic puffins that nested along this coast, and in the 19th century they were massacred. There's a very droll-looking bird. I don't understand why they were such a prey for us, but anyway, the numbers were just decimated, and of course there have been people
who would massacre a puffin.
You would wonder.
Why did they massacre?
You would wonder.
Yeah,
they're
so charming.
Right. They're called, clowns of the sea. There's these droll things, they look so funny, why would anybody want to hurt one? But they were prey for hunters. And so finally people reacted, and the local association for the protection of birds, the Ligue pour la protection des oiseaux, LPO, was formed specifically to protect what were left of the puffins. And so that was established. And then the Sept Îles, the Seven Islands sanctuary, was established, I think, mainly to protect the puffins. There are not huge numbers of them there now, but there are there. And the puffins, live out, they're one of these birds that lives out offshore, miles away, during most of the time, most of its life, and then only comes back to land to nest. And so they come back in the spring to nest at the Seven Islands, and you can see them there. But the main...
And have you seen them, Carroll, when they're such proficient birds when they're swimming or when they're flying?
Yeah.
They're incredible to watch. And then they land and they can't do it. You can tell that they don't spend much time in their lives on land, because they sort of crash land and then roll all over the place and stumble about like they don't know what they're doing. It's hilarious.
Well, you must, when you go to, time your visit to the nesting period for the puffins, because they're not there all the time, of course. And they also have to share the island with thousands and thousands of northern gannets.
I love gannets as well.
It's a fou de bassin in French, and the last thing they're counted. There's a census taken using photography and so forth and so on, and the last count that I read, which dates back a few years, was that there are over 20,000 nesting couples of gannets on the Seven Islands, and if you're already familiar with gannets, I was learning about this myself when I went out there. They're spectacular. They're the biggest seabirds, I think, in Europe. Not the biggest in the world, but certainly around here. And they hunt by diving vertically into the water to grab sardines and sprats and things like that. And they hit 100 kilometers an hour. Quite a sight. And
super fast.
Yeah, and when there are excursion boats to go out to the Seven Islands. Most of the islands are closed to human visitors. They can only go around in boats. There's one of those islands where there used to be some monks, a monastery or some sort of hermitage, and you can go there, but there's not much to visit there. I think it's just mainly you go out there on a boat and see the islands and the birds. And as you approach the biggest island, it appears to be white, like covered with snow or something like that. It's all birds. It's birds. It's gannets. It's wall to wall gannets. I didn't see any of them, diving into the water the way I've seen it on, videos and something like that. But I imagine, there wouldn't be much chance for a sardine to survive anywhere near that island. But it's worth taking that little boat ride out. And I think for people who are bird watchers, but also who are just interested in birds or appreciate them, walking along this trail in the northern coast is really a great experience, because there are so many different birds, different seabirds, various different kinds of gulls, as well as these gannets and puffins and cormorants as well, and so forth. It's a bird watcher's dream, really, to walk along there, especially and I appreciate it too, because I'm not really a bird watcher, but I learned about them, and you can see these birds so much more than you see birds when you walk through a forest. In the forest, you hear them, but to see them isn't always so easy. But
yeah, you have to be careful if there's terns there. Have you ever been attacked by a load of Arctic terns?
No, I haven't. I avoided that.
So lots of these sort of coastal bird colonies have Arctic terns, and they're quite protective over their nests, sensible. But they literally dive bomb you, and they peck at your head to make you go away. And you can do tours of these places where they suggest that you wear a hat or at least a hood, because the birds will just come and get you. And I went with my wife somewhere, and I can't remember, it was off Northumberland, I think. And they left her alone completely, but they absolutely went for me. And I was getting like a bruised head from how much they were attacking my head. I was like, I'm vegetarian. I'm not going to do anything.
Well, I haven't. Well, I'll be careful next time. I'm not sure. Probably would be some around. But one thing, the gulls will just steal your lunch. If you give them a chance, they'll snatch, a sandwich right out of your hand, or certainly if you put it down. course, some of this behavior is conditioned by the presence of humans and the food that they leave around and things like that. But I just love watching them and seeing them. And in fact, I recently bought a new pair of binoculars, so I'm going to do a little bit more bird watching next time I'm out there. It's really good. So it's certainly a feature of walking on the GR34 that you can enjoy seeing birds, watching them, and so forth. The different seasons too. Not many people probably hike the GR34 in the winter, although some do. I see reports about this on Facebook, for example, and the weather can be perfectly beautiful in the winter. And there are places where migratory birds spend the winter or rest on their migrations during the winter. For example, around the Bay of Saint-Brieuc, there are thousands and thousands of birds there. It's a very popular spot for migrating birds. So you can see all sorts of birds at different times of year.
Yeah, that's why I started this episode by saying every now and then a book comes along and it's just such a good match. And there's just so much on this route that yes. I could talk about rocks and birds for hours. So I will be careful not to inflict that upon our listeners. It's probably best to avoid that. Because it's a coastal path, I think people often assume that coastal paths will be easy and that they'll be flat and it's just a bit of a beach walk. And as you've already said, as the seagull flies, it's a much, much shorter distance because there's a lot of up and down and in and out around the coast. But what's the actual terrain like?
The terrain is quite varied. It is certainly not all flat. And there are some pretty steep bits here and there, or, frequently I could even say, but it's never steep for very long. I mean, you don't reach great heights. There's one point on the coast between Saint-Brieuc and Paimpol, Pluha, which is the highest coastal cliff in Brittany. Not the highest point in Brittany, because inland there's something higher, but the highest coastal cliff, that's 100 meters high. So that's, not very high. But if you walk up a steep trail for 80 meters or 100 meters, really, because you can reach that point from a beach nearby, you're going to feel it in your legs. So it has some up and down like that in places where you go uphill and then, of course, downhill. And there are a few sections of the trail, with one in particular between Loquirec and Pluganu, towards the end of the hike, where the trail goes up and down on the coast on a very beautiful, spectacular trail right above the sea, up and down for several kilometers, and the total elevation gain for that day's stage is about 900 meters, and you go down about 900 meters as well. So you can look forward to some strenuous walking, but never, it's never technically difficult, and it's not really that difficult for the average fit trekker to go up a few hundred meters and then go down. And then of course, there are sections of the trail that are quite flat. There are sections where you go through forests, very calm and peaceful forests, or across heathland. The approach, for example, to Cap Fréhel is pretty much completely level, and you're out in the open there across heathland, and it's a very easy walk. And there are sections where you walk on or beside the beaches. And so there are an enormous number of beaches that you pass or you walk along or come close to. There's one section of the trail between Cap Fréhel and Saint-Brieuc where you pass during one stage about a dozen beaches with names, one after another, as well as little coves and patches of sand that don't have a particular name. So it's a lot of that. And of course, if the trail does follow a beach or go onto a beach, it may be flooded, covered, with water at high tide. And so in that case, there are generally variant trails that are marked and indicated on maps, so you can walk inland a bit on a higher ground to avoid the high tide. But that doesn't really complicate your life too much. Some of those are just sections that are flooded at a spring high tide and not the average daily high tide. So, but there are so you walk on beaches. And in fact, there's at least one or two where I suggest that you walk on the beach instead of going on the trail inland some distance. And it's, beach walking can be very pleasant. Walking in soft sand can be difficult, but depending on the quality of the beach and so forth, it's very pleasant. And you can take your boots off and put your feet in the water and take a dip too. People enjoy it all in all different ways.
Yeah, I did a trail race once on a sand dune beach, and trying to. I mean, I wasn't even running at that point. I was just trying to walk up and over these sand dunes. It was like I was like something out of a cartoon because my legs were just spinning and I wasn't going anywhere. So
that can be difficult. No, it's true.
It can be really tiring.
You start regretting the tarmac at a certain point, which is pretty desperate.
Yeah, you want a beach where the tide has just been in.
Yes. Yeah,
so it's been recently dampened. I think that's the perfect.
That's right.
Yeah. So what's your favorite bit?
My favorite bit. Well, I guess I already gave that away, I suppose. I think the pink granite coast, and in particular the section between Perros-Guirec and Ploumanac is got to be one of the favorites. But I also enjoyed the section between Loquirec and Plouganu, the one I described where the trail goes up and down quite steeply for a while. But it's a good walk. I mean, if you're ready for that little bit of extra exercise, you'll enjoy it very much. And it's not all up and down too. It's some of it's sweeping across these steep slopes on a traverse. And I think that in general, that kind of walk is really agreeable when you're on this slope, which drops down to the water where the rocks and the waves are crashing and so forth, and traversing across slopes like that. And there's slopes of that sort on that section between Loquirec and Plouganu. Also in the approach to the estuary of Lannion, there's some beautiful traverse walking across these slopes. I like that kind of walking quite well. So those are some of my favorites.
And I'm assuming that the food is all marvelous.
Oh yes, it is marvelous. This is France, after all. But there is also, distinctive local cuisine. I guess Brittany is well known for its crêpe, and in fact, around France and where I live in the Paris area, crêperies are there, and they usually are blue and white decor, which suggests the sea and which suggests Brittany and so forth. And in Brittany, the savory pancake that you would order is a galette, and they put all sorts of things, ham and cheese and eggs and ratatouille. If you're a vegetarian, you can enjoy those and so forth. And then for a dessert, they have is a crêpe with the sweet filling. So and crêperies are all over the place, and it's a good meal which can be more or less filling and heavy. It can be a little lighter, or something to have in the middle of the day, perhaps while you're walking if you pass a crêperie. And then I would say seafood, shellfish in particular, is really big in Brittany. Very large producer of shellfish, in particular oysters. And you pass early on in this book, Cancale, which is a town famous for its oysters. Then further on, you'll see a lot of cultivation of mussels, the moule. And so mussels are a very popular dish with often with chips, moule frites, and scallops, coquille Saint-Jacques are one of my favorites. And there are really strict rules for harvesting coquille Saint-Jacques, and there's a limited season. And I've been puzzled sometimes by seeing them on the menu outside that season, and I ask, where are these coming from? And sometimes the waiter doesn't really know. And I think either they're coming from, if they're fresh, they're coming from some other area where the rules, regulations for harvesting them are different or more liberal, or maybe they're just frozen. And in fact, frozen coquille Saint-Jacques can be good. We freeze ours sometimes, and I then saute them, and they're great. So anyway, that's so the food there. And then some specialized food is salt meadow lamb, when you walk around Mont-Saint-Michel, you'll see sheep grazing out on in fields right beside the water and outside the dike that you're walking on. And during at least spring high tides, those fields, meadows are submerged by the water. And so the grass that's growing there picks up some salt, and it gives a special flavor, a little touch of salty flavor to the lamb, and that's a local specialty. So you can enjoy the food, and then there's some desserts that are just going to be calorie bombs, and so you can enjoy, you can restore, and then also Breton, along with Normans too, I should say, make very fine cider, and people often like to accompany a meal of crêpe or a galette with locally produced cider. So those are some of the culinary highlights.
Yeah, you need to eat well after a day of walking.
Yes. I sometimes eat too well after a day of hiking.
I think that happens quite a lot. You get quite a lot of people who go for these treks and they assume that they're going to, come back and be a perfectly slim-toned version of themselves, but actually they've realised that the provisions are too good.
Yeah, that's happened to me.
Yeah, and then just quickly, what are the accommodation options like?
They're pretty good. I think one reason why they're good is because Brittany really is a very popular area for holidays. And so there's a supply that meets that demand. But of course, it's somewhat concentrated in areas that attract the most tourists. But you have the full range of hotels, of course, of different levels, number of stars, different qualities. Many B&Bs, in French, chambre d'hôte. There are some youth hostels in several towns. There are gîtes d'étape, not a lot of gîtes d'étape, but some, which I've really enjoyed. Gîte d'étape is like a hostel, basically, with varying, sometimes there are food available, sometimes you're on your own. And then there's camping as well. There are a lot of campgrounds in Brittany, again, especially along the coast, right where you want them to be, because many people come for holiday and they want to camp and then walk down to the beach. So there are many commercial and municipal campgrounds, and there's often a place for people. They're mainly catering to people coming in a car or bicycle, motorcycle, and so forth. But they also, of course, are happy to welcome trekkers. And a few of those campgrounds also have some sort of little cabin or tent that they offer to trekkers who are not camping, don't have camping gear, the tent and so forth. And so you can stay in one of those, which is very convenient sometimes and also quite economical. And if it's mentioned here, if you're going to anticipate staying in a cabin in one of those campgrounds, you should bring along with you either a sleeping bag or more commonly
your meat sack.
That's it. You already knew. Yeah, a sac à viande, which is very small and light and so forth. And because they'll provide a blanket maybe, but they want you to have your own sleeping bag liner, which the French call a sac à viande, and that's certainly worth carrying. And then if you do that, it's also helpful to have a light towel. If you're staying in hotels, you don't need to bring your own towels usually. But if you're going to be in a campground or if you're going to be in a gîte d'étape, you should have your own towel.
And if you're going to stop in some of the little coves and have a sneaky swim, having a really small light towel is probably not a bad idea anyway. Absolutely,
that's right. So the accommodations are good. But there will be, during the July, August, especially, a lot of pressure on some of those accommodations around popular spots. I can mention here that, just to illustrate how Brittany attracts holidaymakers, one town in particular I know, it's called Saint-Carl-le-Guido, has a permanent population of a little over 3,000 people. And in the summer, peak season in the summer, it rises to about 30,000 people. So by a factor of almost 10, which is pretty dramatic. And some of those people are people who have second homes, holiday homes or apartments more often in these towns. And this is a controversial factor in a way, or phenomenon. If you walk along some of these towns on the boardwalk in front of the apartment buildings and the beach, you'll see these apartment buildings and all the shutters are down. If you're there in May. If you come there in July, they'll all be up, I suppose. But population and the activity fluctuates enormously. And it's one of the reasons why I think it is good to hike in May. I mean, sometimes you'd say, oh, it's a little strange having all these places shuttered down, but the businesses will be open in May and June. It's a good time. Weather's good. It's not too crowded, whereas you'll find it more complicated to get a place to stay in July and August. And to go back to camping, quite a number of people camp wild in Brittany, and it's a little bit, you need to be discreet. It's not always expressly permitted, but it's tolerated. And the French sometimes make a distinction between what they call camping, which could be extended period of time, setting up your tent and for a week or more, and a bivouac, which is just a discreet small backpacker's tent pitched in the late afternoon, evening, and then knocked down early next morning, leaving no trace, of course, of your presence, no fires and anything like that, and on you go. And people who do that have no particular difficulties. They may not find it very easy to get water nearby. You have to plan your logistics that way, but otherwise it works well. A lot of people do camp, and I've met some and talked with them, and I've also read people's descriptions of them online as well. So that's an important, and for many people, that's camping is great. It's economical. You don't have to worry about reserving in advance. You just have to plan your water and food carefully so that you have it when you need it on your own.
And for some of the people that might be a bit put off to hear you talking about how touristed it is, I think out of all those tourists, there's not going to be that many of them that are going to be walking this route. So right. You probably get, when you're staying somewhere, that's going to be your chance to have the crowds and experience the busyness of the tourist destination. But within your day walking, you're probably not going to feel like it's a overpopulated route, are you at all?
No, I don't think that. I think that's true. And I think it varies quite a bit in certain places too. As I said, that section between Perros-Guirec and Plumenach, you're going to see a lot of people, at least even in May or something like that. Whereas elsewhere, you're much more on your own, walking along. You're rarely going to go for hours without seeing somebody, but it's pretty much a different experience out in the wild. Most people come to lie on the beach and to windsurf and build sandcastles and things like that, and have a pleasant seaside holiday. And to put 10 kilos on your back and walk for 20 kilometers or 30 is not everybody's choice of a vacation. For some people, it's the only kind of vacation they want to do. And I fall in that category, I'd say.
Yeah, I can't wait. It just makes me want to pack my things and just go and look at some rocks and point out some gannets and have some crepes. It just sounds perfect. So thank you for that. You've really sold it to me, Carroll.
Good. Well, I want to hear about it when you do a trip report.
I hope you enjoyed the latest episode of Footnotes, the Cicerone podcast. I'd love to know what you think, or if there's anything you'd like us to cover in future episodes. Please email live@cicerone.co.uk or leave a review on your podcast platform. You can follow or subscribe to the podcast to make sure you don't miss new episodes, or you can sign up to our newsletter for all our latest news, events and guidebooks. Visit cicerone.co.uk for further details. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, come and find us on our social channels. We're on all the main ones as @Cicerone Press, and we also have a Facebook group, Cicerone Connect, where you can meet and chat to other outdoor enthusiasts. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you soon.